should probably introduce myself properly. I'm Liam Herringshaw. I am a paleontologist, and I am now the, it sounds a bit grand, but the director of the Yorkshire Fossil Festival. And I'm also a paleontologist working with Hidden Horizons, which is a company based here in Scarborough. And I'm coming live from the Fossil Shop, which has opened this weekend as our new headquarters in Scarborough. And from here, we sell replicas and real fossils, but we also do lots of trips around. So if you look for Hidden Horizons online, you'll find a little bit more about myself. Generally, I've only really officially started working with Hidden Horizons in the last couple of months. I spent the previous 15 years as an academic, a paleontologist working in universities in the UK and in Canada. And my interests really are in sort of life in the sea through time. That's probably the very simple way of looking at my my interest. And you say, okay, so isn't this session called Chalking with Dinosaurs? What's that got to do with life in the sea through time? And actually, the thing that makes the link, well, there's two links really. One is that I'm interested particularly in trace fossils. So trace fossils are the remains of animals and plants' behavior. So rather than finding the bodies themselves, so as body fossils, you find the fossil plant or the fossil animal itself. A trace fossil is something that is produced by a creature, an organism, during its life. So they're a little bit different, perhaps, from the fossils that you might imagine generally with sort of dinosaur bones and ammonites and so on, because what we're looking at are things that don't necessarily preserve much about the animal directly as a shape, but they tell us about the animal or the plant's behavior. And so my real interest in the last few years has been looking at sea over time and fossil traces. So sort of rather than the fossils of the animals and the creatures themselves, looking for traces of their activities. And the Yorkshire Coast is a fantastic place to come and look for these kinds of trace fossils. And the most famous trace fossils from the Yorkshire Coast are dinosaur footprints. So that seemed like a kind of a good link to make to people who perhaps don't know the geology of the Yorkshire Coast. We have a lot of it's very similar in many ways to the Dorset coast. So actually we have a lot of similar Jurassic geology, and there are lots of things that people come and look for as body fossils, but as trace fossils, probably the most famous things that we get on the Yorkshire Coast are dinosaur footprints. So chalking with dinosaurs was something that kind of evolved during lockdown, really, in the early spring, where we would normally have been hoping to get out on the coast and show people footprints and other trace fossils and other body fossils, and we couldn't really do that. So I started drawing dinosaur footprints on my driveway at home in chalk, and it kind of grew from there into something of an activity. And so if you are to go online and search for chalking with dinosaurs, you'll find that there are a few videos that I've posted from earlier in the spring of me drawing footprints on my driveway and trying to understand them. And again, why are you doing that? Well, again, what we can do is, because footprints tell us about a creature moving over a landscape, maybe a river, floodplain, or it might be a beach, or anything really that you could make footprints in. We can, of course, make footprints ourselves and then use that to sort of think about what the fossil footprints might tell us. And so chalking with dinosaurs was, as I say, a means of getting, well, me initially out on my driveway drawing footprints, and then my daughter as well got involved. And then we sort of spread the word more generally to say, well, you can do this yourself, and we'll give you information on some of the Yorkshire dinosaur footprints that you can use. So I have behind me, I always carry a footprint with me. This is a cardboard cutout of the largest three-toed dinosaur footprint that has been found on the Yorkshire coast. So just north of Scarborough, there's a place called Burniston Bay, which is very famous around here for its dinosaur footprints. And this cardboard replica, you can see my foot in the middle of it for scale, is about 60 centimeters long. And that's the biggest three-toed footprint that that's been found. And Will, who set up Hidden Horizons, was one of the people who actually sort of described and published that footprint. So what can we say about a footprint? Well, what I've started doing is making little videos to try and explain some of what we're doing. So if you go online and look for Chalking with Dinosaurs, you'll find a few videos. I've made one, I just finished it last night really, but this week I was thinking about taking you guys on a virtual field trip, actually trying to go out on the coast today virtually, but unfortunately the tide's in. It's not a good time to try this. So I've made a video instead, and I'm now going to share my screen, and you will hopefully be able to see my my video. Actually, I think John, at the moment, I can share your screen. So you might need to switch me as a host just to make sure I can
bear with me 2 seconds.
Share my screen. That's all right. I'll get my video ready so it's ready to go. So this is just a 5-minute thing, just to kind of give you a bit of a taster of why Scarborough is a good place to come and look for footprints, and then the Yorkshire coast more generally. And then I'll give you a bit more detail afterwards. Following that video, and you will see also in the chat section that I have got a little download. I have a website called Fossil Hub, fossilhub.org, which has all sorts of Chalking with Dinosaurs and other information available. And there's a link there that you can click on, and it will give you a handout of one of the footprints that I found earlier this year that we can use later on to chalk with dinosaurs. Okay, so yes, coming up is a 4-minute and 20-second video of me trying to explain how Scarborough is such a good place for us to start looking at dinosaur footprints and thinking about what they tell us about creatures' behaviour in time. So let's go. Hello and welcome to Chalking with Dinosaurs, or welcome back to Chalking with Dinosaurs, for those of you who've watched some of the earlier videos. If you've watched any of the previous episodes, particularly episode 4, you'll know that episode 5 is supposed to be about Megalosaurus, but instead it's about Scarborough. Why? Well, 2 reasons. 1, the South Bay of Scarborough is a fantastic place to go and make footprints in the sand. And 2, the South Cliff of Scarborough has rocks which contain fossil footprints. So we can make some of the former and chase some of the latter. Here I'm on the beach, the tide is going out. And as I walk over the South Bay sands, I make footprints. Very dry sand, not much detail. Slightly damp sand, not bad. Very wet sand, splodgy. Regardless of how well preserved they are, however, the spacing of my footprints will also tell you something about what I was doing. If I was walking, the prints will be relatively close together. If I was running, they'll be further apart. Experiments have shown that if a bipedal vertebrate like me, or a 2-legged dinosaur, is walking, its stride length is less than 2 times its hip height. And if it's running, its stride length is more than 2.9 times its hip height. If I have a hip height of 0.9 meters, my walking stride should be 1.8 meters or less. And if I'm running, my running stride should be 2.6 meters or more. And my running stride that I've measured here is 3.1, give or take, meters. And my walking stride, which I measured earlier, is 1.65 meters, which is below the walking limit predicted. So all we need now are some fossilized footprints in ancient sand. Having walked a short distance further south into South Bay and to the South Cliffs, we can now see that there are rocks in front of us. These are Middle Jurassic, mostly sandstones, and they are known to have dinosaur footprint fossils in them. So let's see if we can find any. Almost immediately, we find some exciting looking prints, except the substrate is concrete, and these are dog footprints made in wet cement, probably in 1996. However, we soon find some real rocks in which we can look for real fossil footprints. You'll see here that the rocks are layered. There are orange sandstone layers and grey mudstone and siltstone layers, and they're generally fairly horizontal, not perfectly so. But when we move along, we'll see in places they get disturbed. So the layers go from being fairly horizontal to suddenly being a bit bendy. And indeed, in places, they look extremely squished. Here we see a really rather nice example in one of the sandstones of a very squished looking shape. And you can see a blob of sandstone pushing down into the mud and disturbing the layers of mud that it was pushed down into. So that's a curious feature. Then, as we move along, we can see some fantastically thinly bedded rocks, again, still sandstones and mudstones, but much more regularly bedded, probably tidal, being influenced by tides going in, tides going out, high tides, low tides, probably quite similar in many ways to the South Bay of Scarborough now. Well, this is Jurassic. But look what happens. Boom! A great big blob of sand pushing right down into these thin layers of sand and mud. And this is a footprint. It's probably a sauropod footprint. It's very round and it's pushing down quite deeply into these layers of sand and mud. Sauropod footprints are in fact pretty common in the cliffs of the South Bay. Here's one, here's another, and here's another showing some really quite detailed shape. But where are the three-toed footprints? Well, annoyingly, I couldn't find any particularly good ones when I went out looking. So these are some ones that my colleague and friend Dr. Katie Strang found last year, which are rather nice examples from the South Bay. And of course, we do have some excellent ones from nearby, which we can make use of and interrogate using the approaches we had on the beach with our own footprints, or indeed on our own driveways with chalk. Okay, so that was my very short video, which hopefully was still sufficiently clear that you could follow it. And as I say, there are a series of other videos available as well. And what I was trying to show was that I can use my own feet, my own hips, and my own body size to interpret how fossil footprints might have formed. And we've been able to show over the years that there are quite a variety of dinosaur footprints present in the cliffs of the Yorkshire coast. So anyway, yes, so the footprints, I didn't find any brilliant three-toed prints in the South Cliffs this week. And it's one of the vagaries of looking for things in the cliffs is that you only get a certain slice of the rocks, and you may not find the right surface that shows a good three-toed print. So as I say, there are places that we can find them. The handout that I have produced that you can hopefully download should you wish to. This is a three-toed print that I found at Burniston Bay, just north of Scarborough earlier this year. And one of the tests for you to try and work out is how big do you think the dinosaur was? In the video, I mentioned that there are various calculations that we can do. Your hip height, your hip height is in proportion to your foot size. So one of the things you can do is measure your own foot size and then measure your hip height and look at the ratio, the relationship between the two, and use that to interpret a fossil footprint. If you just find a footprint, you obviously don't know how big the creature was, but we can make a reasonable estimate of the size of a creature's legs based on the size of its feet, particularly with a two-legged creature. Four-legged creatures are slightly different, but there's still a relationship we have to, again, measure carefully. So that handout you can play with and see if you can work out how big the creature was. Now, in places on the coast, we can actually find lumps of rocks. This is a piece of sandstone, and it is actually a three-toed footprint which has weathered out of the cliff. And people often say, really? How are you working that out? There's a teardrop shape here, which is the middle toe, and then there are bulges on either side. We look at it sort of end on, we can see there's a very long pointed feature. And actually, when we look at it in one direction, we can actually see some of the layers of sand have been squished into a kind of three-toed shape. The best way to actually work out what this really is by finding them in the rocks and then tracing the shape properly. And in places, particularly in some of the sandstones north of Scarborough, you can find entire trackways of these kinds of shaped footprints. And yeah, we can do the sorts of things I was doing on the beach of measuring the footprints and the sizes and the spacing between the feet to work out what a creature might have been doing. Now, I should add the caveat here that I'm not a dinosaur specialist. I work as a paleontologist, I say mostly in marine rocks, and I look at a lot of different kinds of trace fossils. But on the coast, the fossil footprints are one of the things that we often come across. And it helps us understand what things were doing, both in terms of their behavior, but also in terms of the environments that they were living in. So the cliffs that I showed you in the video in the South Cliff are mostly sandstone, but sandstones and mudstone and siltstone, and we get certain features in there that we can interpret in terms of the environment. So we find fossil ripples. So we can go on the beach, South Bay in Scarborough, and find ripples on the beach today. We can also find them in the rocks, and we can measure the size and the shape of the ripples and work out what the currents were doing, and we can take that information and take it back to understand what the geology of the environment may have been. And we think that the Middle Jurassic, where most of these footprints in the Yorkshire coast come from, was a coastal setting with various rivers flowing into it, and producing a sort of coastal plain with lots of different floodplain and channel environments and beach environments, and that various creatures were moving around this landscape. And various people have published work on this, to try and understand the environments. Mike Romano and Martin White from Sheffield University spent many years describing the Yorkshire dinosaur footprints, so there's a lot of literature from them. And also more recently, the paper by Slater and colleagues who were based in Sheffield were looking at the plants as well as the dinosaur footprints to try and understand what the environment was like. And if you've got a ginkgo tree in your garden, that's actually one of the things we might find as a fossil in the Middle Jurassic. Some kinds of plants are around. Plants that we still find today are found as fossils. There were no flowering plants in the Middle Jurassic. So the things that we probably see mostly as plants today are flowering plants. They weren't there in the Middle Jurassic. They were probably just beginning to evolve. There's various groups, including a type of fossil plant called Catonia, which is from Caton Bay, just south of Scarborough, that may well be a sort of a close relative of the flowering plants, but we don't see any true plants. I see you've got a question in the chat. How do you know which dinosaur print belongs to which dinosaur? It's actually a very good question. We often don't. We've got about 30 different types of dinosaur footprint that have been described from the Jurassic rocks of the Yorkshire coast. So there's quite a variety of prints that have been described. But as you can do yourself, when you're on the beach or anywhere else that you can make footprints, your behavior can, and the nature of the sand or the mud that you're walking on can change the kind of footprint that gets produced. So sometimes we may be producing lots of different traces or tracks, even though it's the same creature doing it. So we have to be a little bit careful about simply assigning one fossil footprint to one type of dinosaur. Equally, one type of dinosaur might produce a few different footprints. There is a Jurassic footprint we find around the Yorkshire coast called Deltapodus, and it's Deltapodus means the D-shaped foot. And that has been generally interpreted as being a stegosaur footprint. Now, what's really interesting is we don't have any fossil bones of stegosaurs from the Jurassic rocks of Yorkshire. So there's no direct evidence. Actually, that's not quite true. There's one very small bit in some upper Jurassic rocks, but there's not much to really tell us that stegosaurs were around. But these footprints match very well with the kind of footprints that we think stegosaurs and stegosaurids, the relatives of stegosaurus, would have produced. So actually the footprints can tell us a lot about potential dinosaur diversity that we don't get from the bones. And you might think that's quite surprising in a way, because the footprints, you think how easily your footprints wash away. You think, wow, they get fossilized and the bones don't. But actually once you cast a footprint in sand and the sand starts to harden, it may actually have a better chance to become a fossil than a bone over time, which can dissolve. So yes, we've about 30 different types of dinosaur footprints that are found, and people have argued that probably about 7 main types of dinosaur, a couple of types of sauropod, the big 4-legged, vegetarian dinosaurs, herbivorous dinosaurs, a couple of types of theropod, and probably a couple of types of ornithopod as well. And again, actually, there's one thing that's chalking with dinosaurs. If I come back to my big footprint, this was, say, found at Burnaston Bay. It's the biggest 3-toed footprint that's known from the Yorkshire coast, about 60 centimetres long. And say there's my foot, which is about 27 centimetres long for scale. We don't have any bones from the Yorkshire coast of big 3-toed dinosaurs, but in Oxfordshire, there are bones of Megalosaurus, and those rocks are the right age, and there are trackways in Oxfordshire that are quite similar. So we, again, suspect that things like Megalosaurus were here on the Yorkshire coast in the Middle Jurassic, but we don't find evidence directly of their bones. So it kind of shows that we can use different lines of evidence in different places to work out the potential sort of diversity of dinosaurs in a place like Yorkshire. So we find very few bones, but quite a lot of footprints. What are my other final sort of points? So yes, so you want to do this sort of thing yourself if you want to actually, if you don't have a beach to hand. Some of you will have a beach nearby, I'm sure, but many of you won't necessarily. If you can go out on the beach, you can make your own trackways and produce something that is equivalent to the sort of trackways we find in the fossil record. But if you don't, then you can print out the handout and cut that out and use that as a template and say draw things on your driveway. My first question for you was if you take the handout of the smaller Burniston footprint, so this one that's available it's quite a small footprint. So how big was the dinosaur? That's your first sort of challenge to work out, and so you can use your own foot to hip height ratio to estimate that. In general, people have calculated that two-legged dinosaurs had a hip height that was 4 times the length of their foot. So if you find a footprint and you can work out the length of the foot, then the hip height is thought to generally be about 4 times that foot length. So you can use that as a means of predicting. Then you say, okay, what were they doing? If I find a trackway, how do I know if they were walking or running? As I said in the video, there are different calculations that we can make, and generally for a two-legged vertebrate such as humans or two-legged dinosaurs, if the stride length, so that's the distance from left foot to left foot or right foot to right foot, if that stride length is less than 2 times the hip height, the creature was walking. If it's between 2 and 2.9 times, it's trotting, and if it's more than 2.9 times, it's running. And again, you can test this yourself by walking and running on the beach, and that's what I was doing on Scarborough South Bay. But you can chalk things on your driveway, or you can draw them on bits of paper and spread them around the house. There's lots of different ways you can approach it, and it means that hopefully then you can start to think about how you might interpret these fossils, these trace fossils, if you were to come across them. And they actually are more common than you might think. So the Dorset coast does have, or the Dorset County region has a few places where dinosaur footprints are found. The Isle of Wight has places where they're found. In Sussex, around Hastings, there are footprints found around there. The Isle of Skye in Scotland has now become quite famous for its Jurassic dinosaur footprints. So people are finding that these are actually around in more places than perhaps we'd thought. But yes, for the Yorkshire coast, it's quite diverse, and it's very useful because it tells us things that we don't know about creatures that are not being fossilized as bones. So we go, oh, there's definitely something was living here, but we can't find the actual evidence of the creature as a body fossil. So yes, I would say that you can play around with the tracks on your, make them on the driveway. If you do take any pictures and post them anywhere, feel free to put a hashtag chalking with dinosaurs, and then I can find that on various social media and comment on things. But obviously you can also drop me a line. You can find me online relatively easily if you've been hunting things or you want to know more. I would say yes, ahead of next year, we are hoping to sort of launch our Fossil Festival campaign for Yorkshire Fossil Festival campaign for September next year. Will be the September 11th and 12th is the plan, and hopefully we'll be able to do things both in person and virtually, but we'll of course see how the year progresses. We're also hoping to run lots of trips out on the Yorkshire coast from the spring onwards, so from sort of February half term, we're hoping we can get back out on the coast and actually take people out hunting for footprints. So have a look at the Hidden Horizons website, and we'll be putting information on those up. And if there's anything you want to ask about Yorkshire coast fossils or trace fossils or making footprints or what have you, then can I unmute John? Sorry, right, let's unmute John. Right, let's see if I can do that.
Thank you so much. Because I gave you control, sorry about that, because I gave you control of being hosted. I wasn't able to unmute myself. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry about the technical issues earlier. This is all new technology for us as well, so we're getting used to it, and we're basically using it on the fly. So apologies about the errors there. Thank you, Liam. If anyone's got any questions, if they'd like to put it into the chat box, please, if you're on the Zoom call. The Facebook feed, I know, is running about 30 seconds behind the live feed. So if there's anyone in the Facebook feed who's got a question, if they can put it in sort of as quick as possible. But I have a question for you, Liam. why is it that Yorkshire has lots of footprints, whereas Lyme doesn't? I mean, is it the sand? Is it the stone? What's the difference?
Yeah, you say the Yorkshire Middle Jurassic environment lent itself to fossilization of footprints a bit more. So if you're looking at, say, Lyme, the Lyme Regis, the rocks there are lower Jurassic and are all marine rocks, so they're out in the sea. So you're away from land where footprints would be being produced. Not to say there are no trace fossils. There are some lovely fossil burrows that I've found in the rocks around Lyme Regis, but they're of creatures living in the mud in the sea. In terms of dinosaur footprints, then we're obviously looking for areas where there was land or close to land where these footprints could be made. And in the case of Yorkshire, we think there were quite frequent floods, either by the river or by rivers or the sea, that were then burying and preserving things. We're also in probably quite a Mediterranean environment at that time. And if you go out in the Mediterranean today, you can walk on the mud in the morning and it'll have dried out quite significantly by the end of a sunny day. And then if the sand comes along and fills that in, you could fossilize your own footprints in a way. So a combination of sort of environmental factors. But as I say, there are various places, typically a little bit later, more into the Cretaceous, which is the period following the Jurassic, in the south coast of England, where you find the right environments to find good footprints. So yes, it's really kind of controlled by the environment and where things were living and where the tracks were being made, and then whether they were being buried and fossilizing.
Thank you.
I can see a question in the chat from Jane and Miles. How old is the Jurassic? That's a good one. It's essentially about 200 to 145 million years ago. You will find that those dates change slightly every so often because somebody will make a slight adjustment to the data that they've got to work out the ages, but it's essentially around 200 to 145 million years ago. So the rocks in Scarborough that we're looking at with the dinosaur footprints are about 165 million years old. And again, to me, that just it's one of the things that never, even though I'm a geologist and have been for many years, it never ceases to kind of amaze me that a footprint is 165 million years old. You think about walking on the beach today and the tide washes your footprints away. They don't last a day, and then these ones have been preserved for 165 million years. And there are much older footprints in places. You can go to Scotland, and there are desert sandstones there that have got footprints in them that are considerably older than that. Not made by dinosaurs, I should say, but by earlier reptiles. Okay, John, are you any other questions that are appearing?
I've got nothing on Facebook, so I think
the other thing I would say, my other question to you guys, I've said measure your feet and your hip height and think about the ratio and use that to sort of play around with trackways, and then think about the spacing. How far apart would if you were drawing footprints on a driveway, how far apart would they need to be to make them a running trackway? You can, of course, think about we're using ourselves as a means of understanding footprints, but of course dinosaurs have closer relatives than us. So you might want to think about what kind of other creatures you might use. I have a friend called Jesper in Denmark who did his PhD, his research on trying to understand dinosaur footprints, and he got himself access to some emus, which made trackways a little bit more like dinosaur trackways than we do. And so that's a good way of being a bit more scientifically accurate in making the right kind of trackways, because we are a little bit different from dinosaurs in the way our bodies and skeletons are arranged, whereas an emu is actually a lot closer to the theropod dinosaurs that we think were making the three-toed trackways here on the Yorkshire coast. So if you've got a dog, of course, take your dog out for a walk and see how a four-legged track maker changes compared to a two-legged, and you could then think about four-legged dinosaurs in that way. Again, dogs are not particularly closely related to dinosaurs, but they're a good available track maker if you're going to try and experiment. So yeah, you could try that.
Okay, thank you, Liam. That's really fantastic presentation, really entertaining. I want to thank you very much for joining us this weekend. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And as you mentioned earlier, hopefully we can do things together next year and work together to bring something best for Lyme and Yorkshire.
Well, I should say that, I mean, the reason we have a Yorkshire Fossil Festival is because of the Lyme Regis Fossil Festival, that I came to it with some friends over a couple of years, 2011, 2012, 2013, and we thought we should do something up in Yorkshire. So it's great to kind of have the links. And yeah, as we say, hopefully next year we can do a bit more in person. But if we've done it virtually, well, John, you're a pioneer for trying these things virtually, and we can hopefully learn from that as well.
Yes, it's quite a learning curve, I have to say, but yeah, fingers crossed it's going reasonably well so far. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this one. We've got a couple more talks this afternoon, so if you'd like to join us, go to the Marine Theatre link page and have a look at the chats on there, see if you want to join. Thank you once again, Liam, and good luck for the weekend, and see you soon.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks everyone for listening, and yeah, say chalk with dinosaurs, and feel free to tag us in things, and we can hopefully answer questions later if you come up with any.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. So yeah, this one probably only about 68 centimeters, so quite short, well, short legs, relatively short legs, shorter than mine. And this one is a bit of a question, because I say the biggest Megalosaurus fossils we have are actually not as big as the legs would be if you worked it out from the size of the footprint. So it's a bit of a mystery. Are the footprints bigger than the of a bigger Megalosaurus than the body fossils in the museums indicate? We're not quite sure. People have argued about this. So there's always a bit of detective work still to do. Right, I guess I will let you good people go, but thank you all for listening. And yes, have fun hunting or chalking with dinosaurs. And yeah, do let me know how you get on, and I'll happily answer questions later, and then maybe see you in person at a festival in the future. Cheers.